So one very popular topic of conversation among guitarists is right-hand technique. How we can work on this and how we can find the best technique for playing things like bebop, for instance. Now, I'm going to talk about the way that I do it today. There's not just one way to do it, and this might not even necessarily be the best way for you. But I do think I have a little bit of grounding in the history of jazz guitar playing with what I do. Hello, welcome to Jazz Guitar Scrapbook. Okay, so I've relearnt picking about 3 times, I think, maybe 4 times during my life as a player. And when I was starting out, I was sort of playing in a way very much like Kurt Rosenwinkel, if you watch the way he plays, for instance, like this. I mean, I didn't do it because of Kurt, I just sort of found my own way into picking like this. And this worked really well for me for years. I was very happy with it. And then later on, I started playing a little bit more kind of traditional jazz, swing music, and I wanted to learn the rest stroke picking approach because I thought it would give me more acoustic projection, which it certainly did. And then a little bit later on, I got a bit tired of the kind of sort of sound, and then I moved more towards doing this sort of thing, which you can see me do on older videos. And then I went back to this way because I realised that if I was holding the pick like this, I couldn't use my fingers to play chords. But I still feel like the foundation of my picking style is what a lot of people would call rest stroke picking. But I've done a few modifications and worked on a lot of different stuff to be able to widen out the range of things I can play this way. Okay, so I'm just going to talk to you about the basics of my pick hand technique. It all starts with the downstroke, really. Now, the way I make the downstroke is really important. So I'm holding the pick like this with a floating wrist, but it really works in any position. You don't have to use it this way necessarily. And you'll notice that I've got the pick sort of inclined at 45 degrees. So if I was more of a alternate pick, I might be using it straighter, but I'm using it slanted like this. And I'm making my pick strokes into the guitar with a mixture of sort of mostly wrist movement actually, but a little bit of forearm as well. The most important thing is the angle of the pick, and this is something I've got very much from Troy Grady, and he kind of shows in his Cracking the Code videos that really actually the pick stance and the direction of the movement of the pick is much more important than anything else, even the type of movement you're using to make the stroke. And in fact, you know, if you understand what he calls it a mechanic, but if you understand the mechanic of it properly, then this will do much more for your technique than just sort of spending hours trying to do alternate picking exercises and not understanding why you can't get them above a certain speed. And I 100% agree with that. He used to call this style of picking downward pick slanting because you slant the pick down, but now I think he calls it upward escape, and it's a slightly larger category of things that fit into upward escape as he's studied more players. So I think one of the best things you can do is just practice this movement on an open chord. I'm using an E major chord there, and you'll notice that when I go down, I'm not separately articulating the pick strokes, I'm just going straight down. And when I come back up, I'm talking about physically, not in terms of pitch. When I come back up towards the roof, towards the ceiling, I use separately articulated downstrokes. Okay, so this sometimes means that people sort of compare this type of picking to economy picking or sweep picking, but the difference is that I can't do it in 2 directions, because if I try doing it in 2 directions, my pick just ends up in straight. Look at that. Whoa, those strings. Okay, so if you look into jazz players, there's a lot of players who use this kind of technique, and you can always sort of notice them by the way this sort of movement they make, the downward swiping movement, and then the separately articulated upstrokes. It's also true of Wes Montgomery, who obviously just used his thumb. This is very much the movement he made. And then there's the whole Rodney Jones, Benson picking school. And this is the same sort of thing, but underarm, right? But the basic idea of it is the same. And Benson picking and a Django style picking, which is the thing with the 45-degree angle. Those two techniques are bound by a lot of the same limitations and also the same strengths. The reason why I started doing it, because as I say, I've learnt my picking technique about 3 or 4 times, is because I was able to get such acoustic power out of it. You know, if I turn the guitar down completely and just play off the acoustic sound of the instrument, you don't really get that from like floating hand alternate picking. I don't think you get the same strength. There's that connection, that rest stroke, just as with classical guitar, is very powerful. And you might not be particularly interested in playing on acoustic instruments, and that's fair enough, but I would say that it does allow you a lot of dynamic control, so I can really... It's really nice having that much control. You know, I can play loudly or softly. Yeah, and there's a lot of power and there's a lot of relaxation in it once you get used to it. I would have actually advised starting by playing only with downstrokes. And this is actually the way that Charlie Christian was meant to have played. And if you go back and you look at people like Billy Bauer, who was, amongst other people's, Joe Satriani's guitar teacher, but also, you know, obviously very important in the Lenny Tristano's school. Only a few years after Charlie Christian, really. They're all massively influenced by Charlie Christian. And even people like Warren Marsh was advising his student, John Klopotowski, friend of the channel, to play only with downstrokes for a more even accentuation. And actually, it's really nice if you do this. Obviously, you're playing with your thumb. You do that naturally. So I definitely recommend doing that. Charlie Christian stuff, I think, was all meant to be downstrokes, right? So even though it might seem like a hilariously limited way to play the guitar, actually you can get quite a lot of speed out of it, you know. There's an argument even that if you're playing at medium tempo, there shouldn't ever be any need to do anything which isn't a downward stroke. And in fact, actually, Mike Marino plays that way. So we're going to start with what is called Manouche style picking. This is a very strict style, and the rule is generally that you start each new string with a downstroke. So we can do alternate picking along one string. So I find like you're making a slightly different movement going down, which is the wrist twist, but also the forearm, and then doing a sort of flick upwards to come out, and I find that allows me to play a bit faster. It's also nice to bounce off the next string as well. So I practice that until it feels like fluent and easy, and then when I'm going across the string, so for instance if I was playing a standard G major scale, starting on the second finger, be down, up, down, up, down, down, up, down, down, up, down, down, up, down, up. And that's basically what I use, and you can see me doing that when I'm playing scales and things on the videos. You can see me using that kind of picking. Might seem a bit weird if you're used to alternate, but it does work. And we're going to go down, up, down, up, down, up, down, down, which feels very awkward if you're not used to it. Up, down, down, up, down, down, up. Okay? And ascending arpeggios can be managed very much in the style of sweep picking. But when we come down, we articulate separately, which probably feels very awkward if you're not used to it. Tend to favour like 2-note string patterns when they're descending. Because actually if I go down, it's very hard for me to start a new string on an upstroke without actually physically moving my hand inwards. That's really hard, so you don't do that very often if you're using this style of picking. So a lot of people say you can't play bebop heads using this kind of style of picking. I suppose it depends on the bebop head. I was actually pretty fine with it for a long time. I found it to be alright. So I want to talk about something called cross-picking, and I'm using this not in the sense that Troy Grady uses it. He sort of talks about it from the point of view of a technique, but rather from a thing that you need to play. And these are arpeggios which go across the strings, right? A classic example in bluegrass might be this. Right? And this is something that comes up in jazz as well. For instance, the Head to Anthropology has that cross string, one note of string thing going on there, right? So the solution I used is one that actually Tony Rice used, because Tony Rice, it turns out too, is a downward pick slanter, and he tended to go down, down, up. Which at first you might say, so I'm going down, down, up on each arpeggio, which probably at first seems a little bit awkward compared to just alternating, but actually it's quite easy to do when your pick is in this position. So there's a great cross-picking study called Triages, I think, Triads, by Chico Pinheiro, and this is down, down, up, he plays it this way, and there's a string skip there, so it's an open triad, right? Spread triad, as the Americans insist on calling them. Yeah, and actually it's not that bad, even with the string skip. I'm able to do that fairly reliably without too much trouble. So that's good. And it's a nice little cross-picking study if you don't know. Now Lage Lund uses this for just general arpeggio. So for instance, if I'm playing a G minor arpeggio, he plays it like this. Hammer on, down, up, down, down, up. Yeah? So that's the way he tends to do it. When I asked him about it, I said, oh, that reminds me of bluegrass players. He said, like, maybe. So I don't know if he studied any of that stuff or it particularly interests him. I want to talk quickly about ways that I've adapted this technique to be a little bit more versatile. So one big problem I was having was muting. So if I was sitting in front of my amplifier, for instance, often I'd be getting the strings bursting into life of their own accord, even on a clean setting, even more if I was using any gain. So I needed to be able to develop a muting technique to be able to play electric, basically. So I just plop my wrist, my palm, should I say, on there in the manner of a, electric guitar player, and just practice the same technique but using slightly different movements. And I find that works absolutely fine. The other thing is like downward economy picking. So if you're looking at things like Inner Urge, you have, when I say downwards, I mean physically upwards or downwards in pitch. So if you're looking at tunes like Inner Urge, for instance, by Joe Henderson, it has these. That's also a classic jazz lick as well. You hear Jimmy Rainey play stuff like that, for instance. So to be able to do that, you just need to change the position of your hand. So I'm just angling it like that, and then you don't even necessarily need to do it that much. Yeah, and that gets me into that area without too much trouble. And the last thing, which is perhaps the most subtle, is being able to alternate pick using this technique, which I can do. Yeah, can do it. Okay, and how that works is I'm actually just making adjustments with my fingers. So for instance, I'm going down, up, down, up, down, using regular rest stroke picking. That's fine, but when I get to this string, I'm going to need to do an upstroke, and my pick is buried there between the strings. So what do? I actually use my finger to lift the pick away, and then I can go to the next string. And then I can alternate pick absolutely fine in that position without any trouble. It's a little bit of a subtle movement, just hit normally and then lift away. I can feel it as a sort of tug from here, okay? It's really subtle, but it gets you out of a lot of trouble. For instance, if I do the first few notes of 26-2 by John Coltrane, yeah, with that descending arpeggio, I use my fingers to get through that, and it sorts it out. Anyway, that's all I've got time for today. I'll do a handout with some exercises and things you can do, and I hope you find that helpful and that clears up questions you might have about the way I pick, and might even make you think about your own picking technique. Thanks very much. See you on the next one.